How often do you find yourself trapped in repetitive patterns of thought and the suffocating feelings that usually come with them? Aren't you tired of feeling overwhelmed and simply out of control? What if I told you that we can become free if we learn to use a very powerful tool that is available to all of us, this dormant capacity that serves as a mental mirror? As we polish this mental mirror, we can see what is happening within us more clearly. We can see what is behind all of our emotional reactivity. This mental mirror is our ability to have mindsight. Mindsight is the only way better mental health can happen for us. Suppressing our thoughts and feelings does not work. But if we're willing to understand our deeply ingrained patterns, we can start to reshape them. Eventually, those old patterns, they're going to lose their power, and new ones will start to emerge. Welcome, I'm Jess, and you are watching Living Free. If you have been watching this series, you know that I have been reviewing and sharing the book Mindsight by Dr. Daniel Siegel. This transformative book introduced the notion of developing the ability of mindsight to observe the mysterious workings of our brain and our mind for better understanding and insight into ourselves as well as others. By cultivating this mindsight, we can finally start the journey of healing and getting unstuck from all of our anxious patterns. Today's topic is just the tip of the iceberg to what is happening behind the scenes within us. But having even a basic roadmap of the nervous system, of our brain, and the mind, this can be quite helpful as we journey towards better mental health and we start to learn what deliberate things that we can do to change how things operate. I will do my best to do justice to Dr. Siegel's work, as well as sprinkle in a few of my own insights along the way. So with that, let's get into it. As we begin, let's first distinguish between the brain and the mind. Dr. Siegel states that the brain is composed of a set of neurons encased in the skull and interconnected with the rest of the body. And the human mind is a relational and embodied process that regulates the flow of energy and information. So when we're over anxious, an inner security alarm goes off within us. And because the different parts of our brains are not synergizing with each other, the anxiety alarm often is quite irrational. The regulatory systems are clashing instead of working together as they're designed. When we're triggered by something that makes us feel insecure or fearful, it could be even a thought, we experience an emotional reaction in the limbic area of our brain, which is the brain's emotional center. The manager part of our brain is this middle prefrontal cortex. And when this is operating correctly, it helps us to regulate those emotions or feelings. It allows us to be rational and calm and make the right decisions in the moment. It helps us to react appropriately. But sometimes, when extreme stress is added to the equation, we feel out of control and unable to get grounded and balanced. And now going forward, I think it's necessary to first address the 9 essential functions that are the responsibility of our middle prefrontal cortex. The first one is body regulation, which is the coordination of our nervous system to, regulate our breathing or our respiration. It regulates our heart rate and digestion. These are the things we don't normally have to think about. They just happen on their own. The second one is attuned communication, and this is how we connect or attune to others and become aware of their inner state as it relates to our own. It's our ability to resonate with others, and Dr. Siegel calls this feeling felt by another, and it often feels pretty good when we connect with people on this level. Number 3 is emotional balance, and this is the sense of ease and well-being within. It's how we experience vitality and a meaning in our lives. And without that ability to be balanced, we can experience extremes of anxiety caused by an over-aroused nervous system, or it can even be depression caused by low arousal. And number 4 is response flexibility. It's how that middle prefrontal cortex creates a space between a stimulus and a response, or input and action. It's that pause that we take, right before we respond. It's awareness of what just happened and what the response should be. How well are you at pausing in this space? Number 5 is fear modulation. And this is how the middle prefrontal cortex directly connects with the brain's limbic area where our amygdala lives. This amygdala is where that feeling of fear is created. And because of this direct connection, it can override the fear response. Number 6 is empathy, and this is how we can create mental maps or images of other people's feelings and their points of view. This is a little bit different than attunement. It's more about imagining ourselves in the shoes of others in order to understand them better instead of irrational and reactive judgments about them. Number 7 is insight, and this is about personal self-awareness, understanding what's happening in our minds. And number 8 is moral awareness. Moral awareness is concerned with our awareness of the social good and if we are acting according to that awareness. How we act behaviorally is going to indicate just how well the faculty of moral awareness is working within us. And finally, number 9, intuition. This is our ability to learn and to create what Dr. Siegel calls the me maps of our mind and how it works. The mind is not just the brain confined to the head. The mind encompasses the whole body. This is how we tap into that inherent inner wisdom and rely on those gut instincts. We are strengthening this ability when we go on this journey of self-discovery. This is where we are learning to trust our inherent inner wisdom. So that's how we can see that the middle prefrontal cortex is our mental manager. It's got a really big job. So it's essential to take care of it so that it can do the job that it was designed to do. When all of these functions are working in coherence, we can achieve a better state of whole body and mind integration. This results in more calm and more well-being, more mental resilience, and that means less anxiety controlling us. Because when we awaken and develop this dormant superpower of mindsight, we will no longer be on emotional reactive autopilot. When we first try to look at our minds, especially after years of anxious living, it's going to be really difficult to see what's going on in all the turmoil. The mind has been uncontrolled for so long that gaining control of it can feel impossible and hopeless. But, I really encourage you just not to give up so quickly. Find mindful practices to calm yourself down. Mindfulness and presence are absolutely essential. I have resources in the description to help in that area. Please check those out. Dr. Siegel likens our accessing mindsight to like stabilizing a camera. As we practice what's happening within us, our minds become more focused. We can see deeper into ourselves, and the more stabilized we become. And this is why presence is of foundational importance. As long as our attention is on vacation in the mental universe of discursive thinking, we're going to have a lot of difficulty in making sense of our minds. So coming home to now is where our work begins. All mental and emotional healing requires us to reflect internally. This reflection requires us to cultivate openness, observation, and objectivity. The mindsight approach calls this concept the tripod of reflection. So let's start first with openness. It's essential to identify all those preconceptions that we've had about ourselves. We hold ourselves naturally to a standard, whatever it may be, or an expectation, right? But most of us fall short of our personal standards, and this leads to countless emotional letdowns. We tell ourselves, well, we shouldn't behave this way, we should not feel this way, so we resist and we just judge ourselves for it. We also have preconceptions about our limitations and our abilities. When we're open, we can create room for what is, not what we think should be. Nobody is doing life perfectly, trust me. We must allow ourselves to be human and become interested in our patterns rather than engage in self-condemnation. The next leg of the tripod is observation. We observe the thoughts and the feelings without becoming them. In one of my last videos, I talked about being the witness or the observer. So sitting in the observer's seat allows us to disengage from the habituated auto-response behavior we're so used to. It helps us notice the patterns. Noticing is key. And when we start this work, it's helpful to look objectively. When a certain feeling like anxiety arises, we note, oh, that's anxiety, or hello, anxiety, I see you there, instead of I am anxious. The latter statement indicates that we have become the anxious thought or feeling. Objectivity is the third leg of the tripod of reflection. This helps develop discernment that reminds us that the thoughts, they're just thoughts. Feelings, they're just feelings. They are not us. They are not actual reality. They are real in the sense that we are experiencing them. But the experience is only happening in our minds. The experience isn't happening in our physical world. It can only happen within. And this recovery work that we're doing can only be successful when we investigate our inner world and apply deliberate attention to it. So to use the power of reflection, all of the tripod legs have to be intact. This is the only way we can productively address our mental health without being consumed by all the problems of the anxious or depressed mind. The best news about all of this is the plastic nature of our brains. As we productively confront what is happening in our minds, we can start to create new neural pathways. Our mental patterns typically follow the path of least resistance. They're formed by neurological connections that have developed since our childhood up until now. The brain will not rewire for a healthier mental state until we address the connections that are responsible for our anxious state. Whenever we interrupt an old negative reaction pattern, we're changing the pathways to create different, more helpful ones. Our old pathways were developed by repetition over the course of our life without any conscious focus of intention. However, new ones can form when we apply intention. Just like training a muscle when we go to the gym, our brain patterns become more stable and balanced and calm with this intentional practice. Each time we fire those neurons in a new way, they are wiring together to form a new pathway. We are strengthening our resilience as we abandon those long-standing anxious patterns. We're creating essentially a new way of being. So the way the brain fires its neurons is actually quite interesting. When we consciously notice a particular anxious thought fire up and counter it with a productive thought, we are rerouting the pathway. The result is a new firing pattern. Then we experience a better feeling. We experience a different perception, an overall different response to life in that moment. Now let's go back to the amygdala. When the amygdala is all ramped up, remember that's where the fear and the anxiousness come from. There is an overabundance of neuronal firings going on in there. And that's why it's so difficult to gain control when you're overwhelmed by an emotion. The limbic area of the brain is where the amygdala lives. This limbic system was where the emotions are formed and is typically in charge in these moments of increased reactivity and arousal. There is increased blood flow in the emotional limbic area that's withholding blood from our middle prefrontal area. And remember, this is the manager part of our brain, the part of the brain that we need to be ready and available to regulate and balance everything out. When everything works as designed, this prefrontal cortex area releases the neurotransmitter called GABA. What GABA does is it manages and inhibits what's happening in the emotional limbic area. But when the limbic system is on overdrive, the GABA isn't readily available like it would be normally to balance and calm us down. I find the brain so fascinating. It's so interesting. Something I've always said that some people don't agree with me on is that we can consciously direct our attention. This is an inherent power of our mind. But many of us, sadly, are victims of the attention vampires of our modern media age. We have very weak attention muscles. Attention is an aspect of awareness. It's directed awareness. At the deepest level, you could say that we are awareness or consciousness if you prefer that term. Therefore, we are also attention. But again, attention is a muscle, figuratively speaking, of course, and as it gets stronger, we rewire the neuronal pathways that strengthen our new response connections. The intentional focus of our intention is how, as Dr. Siegel puts it, self-directing our experience. It's about being consciously present and mindful and deliberate to create those neural firings that are creating new synaptic connections. It's amazing how we can do this. Every experience we have is neurons firing. Every thought and feeling is a little neural explosion. Each neuron contains a control center in it, a nucleus, and the nucleus contains genes. And every time these neurons fire, the genes activate and they express certain proteins. And this expression of proteins builds the links between all the synapses and creates new ones or strengthens existing ones. That's why bad habits are so hard to break, because we've repeatedly strengthened these pathways. And we can see how throughout our lives, the way these genes have expressed determines how and why we are the way we are. So we really have our work cut out for us, wouldn't you agree? However, as we strategically focus on ways to change, we can stimulate how our brain is firing. Until this point, the way our brains developed was involuntary. We are now taking matters into our own hands by using the focused power of our awareness and intentionally and strategically changing the old patterns to create new ones. But self-compassion is the foundation of being able to do this deeply personal work. Even if it starts as just a seed of curiosity, it will grow as our mindsight grows. We're going to become more attuned to what's been happening inside of us for so long. We will begin to make sense of things, unraveling our confusion and learning to change the patterns that have kept us stuck for far too long. We will become more optimistic as we self-direct our inner experience towards a more productive and skillful response pattern. Start immediately with openness, observation, and objectivity. Become consistently interested in caring for your mental health. That is the only way, my friends, to transformation. Thank you so much for joining me today. Don't forget to check out the resources in the description. I hope somebody was encouraged by today's video. With that, I'm going to see you all next time.